Don't let's lose our sense of proportion. I'm sick and tired of telling you that's the only thing that matters. Thus begins The Hive, Camilo Jose Cela's novel of the 1930s in Spain, in Madrid, under the rule of Generalissimo Francisco Franco. Fascist dictator, longest lived of the World War II era dictators, brutal regime that lasted into the 1970s. He was long-lived, and once he became deathly ill, he took forever to die. One thing to keep in mind when reading a novel that was written in a dictatorship is that you have to get it past censors. Sometimes you can't get it past censors. And in order to do that, very often a lot of the novel is cut, which is why when you read the introductions to this, you get a little bit of the flavor of that, because he's got, the translator has put together different introductions that the novelist wrote, that Cela wrote. And one of them is an introduction to the first edition, an introduction to the second edition, introduction to the third edition, and these are all different. Introduction to the fourth edition, because they have different pieces taken out, different pieces put in. They're published at different times and in different places. Prefatory note to the fifth edition, and a prologue to the Romanian edition. And in the Romanian edition, you understand that he's not particularly thrilled with the idea of translation, which, of course, if you're reading this, unless you read Spanish and get a Spanish edition, you're reading this in translation, which I did. So I do not speak Spanish, so I had to read this in translation. And I read the NYRB translation. The novel is 262 pages long, which is, it's not a short novel, but it's not that long a novel. And the way to read this, it reads very fast. And that's the way you should read it. Plan on not spending too much time reading it. Try and cluster your time together so that you can read it quickly, because there are so many disparate characters that are loosely connected. It's not something you can write down a list of characters and follow along. Oh, my little dog is here. She doesn't want to be seen today. Okay. So it's not the kind of novel that you can jot down the name of a character and who they are and follow along with that way. I found that reading it quickly was just a very effective way to keep track of who the characters were and what was going along, keeping them fresh in my memory as I was going through it, because the names would eventually just become garbled together in my brain if I were to try to put the book down. And now it's been a couple weeks since I read it, and the character names have all just kind of jumbled together and gone out through this stream in my right ear. I think that's the way they left. The characters are casually drawn out. You learn about who and what they are by what they say and what they do. There are not deep descriptions of them. Senorita Elvira looks at Don Pablo out of the corner of her eye. Don Pablo is explaining things to a young lad at the next table. Bicarbonate is excellent. Doesn't do any harm at all. What happens is the doctors can't prescribe it because nobody goes to the doctor just to be given bicarbonate of soda. The young man nods without paying much attention and looks at Senorita Elvira's knees, which are a little bit visible under the table. Don't look over there, and don't let your guard down. I'll tell you later. Just don't get caught up in this mess. Doña Pura, Don Pablo's wife, is speaking to a fat friend, laden with jewelry, who scratches her gold teeth with a toothpick. I'm tired of saying the same thing over and over. While there are still men and women in the world, there are going to be problems. Man is fire and woman is tinder. And then, poof, What I told you about what happened on the platform of the 49 tram is God's honest truth. Who knows where it'll all end? The fat woman breaks the toothpick distractedly between her fingers. This is the type of writing that the whole novel consists of. It takes place in Madrid, in a series of homes and cafes, and it bounces back and forth from one to the other. And you begin to get a little attached to some of the characters, and they kind of get dropped for a little bit, and then you wonder what happened to them, and they get picked back up later, and you kind of find out where they are over the course of a few days. And then at the very end of the novel, one of the characters disappears. Nobody knows why, which is very often what happens in these types of dictatorships. Highly recommend this novel. Like I said, read it fast. It's the best way to keep track of what's going on. And what's going on is very rapidly changing. There's an underlying theme with a number of the female characters. A lot of the female characters seem to be prostitutes, to be selling themselves off as the only means of supporting themselves and their families. This seems to be a metaphor for what is happening to Spain. And there's one character in particular whose boyfriend is tubercular. He's got tuberculosis and in a hospital, and the question of whether or not he will survive is based on his medical care and whether or not he can get good food and good medical care, which he cannot afford. The only way that he can get that is if his girlfriend is willing to prostitute herself to get the money for his care. And they discuss this together, and they both decide that they are willing for her to do this in order to save his life. This metaphor for what's happening in Spain and in Madrid is very powerful. It plays itself. It comes up in a number of different scenes. You see the perspective of the person who is purchasing the services of the prostitute. You see it from the perspective of the prostitute who is getting the money from one prostitute who is just has one client who supports her. From the perspective of the parent of the woman who is willing to sell herself in order to save her boyfriend. They don't feel that he is worthy of that. They don't feel that he's worthy of her doing that. Probably most parents of young girls would feel that way about any boy. So this is a theme that plays itself out through most of the novel. The Hive by Camilo Jose Cela, New York Review Books. This is a new edition. I shouldn't say that. This is a new translation. Translation copyright 2023. New edition by New York Review Books. Highly recommend it. I'll put a link down below to New York Review Books if you're interested in purchasing it. Again, as I said, read it rapidly. This is Ron Rutstein from Reading Past Midnight. Thank you for joining us. I hope you'll join us again. Please hit like and subscribe to support the channel.